without further ado, I'll just get started. First weapon I'm going to show you today is the Brown Bess musket. Now, this was in fact the longest used weapon in the history of the British infantry. It was adopted in the late 1700s or the mid 1700s. It was used right up until 1853, so it was a very long service weapon. Now, the Brown Bess musket is known as a musket because the barrel is completely smooth on the inside. There's no rifle. As technology advanced, later weapons started to have rifling in the barrel, and that's why they're called rifles. More on that in just a moment. So, the firing mechanism on the Brown Bess musket is what's known as a flintlock mechanism. So you can see here there's a flint and a hammer. So how you'd fire this is what you do. You take a cartridge which was wrapped in paper out of your pouch, you bite off the end, and you'd pour some powder into this flash pan right here. As you can see, there's a piece here. This is called the frizzen, and then this little pan is called the flash pan. You point your powder in there. So you'd bite off the cartridge, pour a little powder in there, and then you'd close up the frizzen just like so. That's to try and keep it all in there. You then take the musket up like this, and pour the remainder of the powder from the cartridge down into the barrel. Then you'd stick all the paper, a little bit of wadding, and then a ball down there, and use this rammer to ram it all down to the bottom so that it would stay down. Then you're ready to sort of take aim, and you pull this hammer back, and within the hammer you can see there's like a vise sort of, where you screw it and it holds something in place, and there would be a piece of flint. It's like a very sparky material, hence the name flintlock. So you'd have a piece of flint locked into the hammer there. When you pull the hammer back, you then take aim, pull the trigger, that causes the hammer to come flying forward. When the flint hits the frizzen, it creates a spark, which then ignites the gunpowder in the flash pan. There's a tiny, tiny little hole connected to the barrel just at the flash pan. So the spark in the flash pan would be able to travel into the barrel and ignite all the gunpowder that you poured down there. Now when gunpowder is ignited, it very, very rapidly and very aggressively turns into a gas. Hence all the fire and sound. And the gas wants to travel very rapidly. So when it's contained in the barrel of a weapon, it has only one way to go. It goes streaming out the barrel. When you have a shot in front of it, it gets thrown out.
Dante,
That's how
move over.
So that was all well and good, and obviously the British military had a fairly good time with this musket since they used it for so long, but it was rather primitive. There's sort of three important reasons. The first, the lack of rifling meant that the gun wasn't very accurate and the effective range is rather limited. So it's really only a effective range of at maximum about 100 yards. Anything beyond that, you have sort of trouble hitting it. Most of the reason being is that it uses a round ball shot, a musket ball, and since there's no rifling to guide it, it bounces around in the barrel. So by the time it comes out, it's not going to be necessarily traveling in a straight line, and it's going to lose a lot of its velocity because it's been bouncing around in the barrel. As well, since it's a muzzle loading weapon, you have to sort of stand nice and tall straight up because you have to ram the powder down. So you can't be hiding under cover. And it's going to take a rather long time because you have to pour all the powder down the barrel. You also have to pour powder in here. So you're standing there completely exposed to your enemy and you're reloading for a fairly long time. You can only load this and fire it about 2 times, maybe 3 in a minute. Finally, since you have to pour the powder into the flash pan, which is on the outside of the gun, it makes the gun sort of somewhat unreliable when there's weather conditions. So say it was rainy, and water got in and touched your powder, well, water makes gunpowder inert. So if your powder got too wet, your gun would fall. As well, if it was windy and the powder completely blew out of the flash pan without you knowing, you closed the frizzen, got ready to fire, well, if the powder was completely blown out of the flash pan, the gun just would have fired. Often there was issues too where the guns would jam, and in large lines of battle, you'd be filling your rifle up with shot. You pull the trigger, and within the din of the noise, you wouldn't even notice that your gun didn't actually fire or jam. So you keep loading powder and balls in there until eventually it was full with extra powder, and often the guns would sort of explode. And you're holding them up to your face, the barrel's right here, the flash pan's right here. It's actually rather dangerous. So in 1853, the British Army decided to scrap it and try to do something a little bit more advanced. That's this rifle here. This is the Enfield rifle. Now right away you can tell it's a little bit different because it's no longer a musket, it's a rifle. So there's actually spiral grooves within the barrel of the Enfield rifle that guide the bullet. If you've had a chance, or if you do have a chance later, we have a small arms exhibit on the balcony level. You can see the types of shot fired by muskets versus rifles, some of the firearms that we have here. Now, the Brown Bess has a very, very large lead ball, but the Enfield rifle, it's still large, 0.57 caliber, so it's a rather large shot, but this one's cylindrical, and it has little grooves in it to get guided by these the rifle in the gun. So this gun's effective range is a lot further than the Brown Bess musket. It's about 600 yards. Rather far. There's less bullet drop off because of the spiraling, the rifling within the barrel, and since the bullet has spin, think of it like a football. It's going to go farther than that. Now you'll also notice that the firing mechanism is a little bit different. It's no longer a flintlock. This weapon is now a percussion cap. So to load it, you'd still take a paper cartridge, bite it open, and then pour the gunpowder down the barrel. But you'd have no gunpowder outside of the rifle. That's good. Contained in the barrel is a lot less likely to get wet and certainly won't get blown out by the wind. Then, once you had loaded all the shot and the wadding and everything, as before, you would then have another pouch on your person. Out of that pouch, you pull out the percussion cap. It's a little cap that sparks when it is struck. Think of like a modern cap gun, the caps for a cap gun, very similar idea.
Exactly.
You put it just at the bottom of the hammer here, where the snap cap is to protect it. So once everything was loaded down, you put your percussion cap on this area here, pull the hammer back, take aim, fire. When you pull the trigger, the hammer would come flying forward, strike the percussion cap, which would create a spark that would ignite the gunpowder in the barrel. So, again, a far more accurate and had a greater effective range and a little bit more reliable for sure compared to the Brown Bess. The main problem was it's still a muzzle loading weapon and it's still rather slow to load because you still have to pour all the powder down the barrel, you still have to stand straight up and ram everything home. So you could still only fire this gun about 2 to 3 times in a minute depending on how fast you fire. So in 1864 rather, let's see who can improve on the design of our current issue rifle, the Enfield rifle, to make it better, to make it fire a little bit faster. The winner was announced in 1865. His name was Mr. Jacob Snyder. And his idea was to quite literally adapt the current Enfield rifles and make them breech loading. So you literally just cut in a breech block to the back. The British Army liked that idea, so in 1866, the Snyder Enfield rifle came about, and that was mass-produced in the British Army. That became the standard issue infantry rifle in 1866. So, this allowed for some pretty neat technological change to make the rifles a lot better. The breech loading mechanism meant that now you could have a self-contained cartridge. So a brass cartridge similar to modern gun cartridges in that it had powder and the shot all contained in one package. There was no longer having to bite open a cartridge, pour powder down the gun, none of that. You would literally take the round out, had the bullet already in it and the powder already in it, and at the back would have been a similar thing to the percussion cap. So the hammer would strike the back of the cartridge, create a spark which would ignite the gunpowder that is already in the cartridge and send the projectile out the front. You just pull it out of your pouch, thumb it into the breech, and close up the breech. You're ready to fire. You can now fire this gun 10, 12 times in a minute. The Fort Henry Guard record in a minute is actually 14 times. So a very well-trained soldier to be firing a lot of rounds. It was a very, very, very good improvement. As well, since you just have to load rounds into the back, you could now load it in a kneeling position as well as laying completely prone on the ground. So you'd actually could be under cover while you loaded the gun. It's very good. In terms of accuracy and range, it's the exact same as the Enfield rifle because it is an Enfield rifle. Just as a sort of side note, these guns were able to fire so fast that it was almost too fast for their design, since they were originally designed as a percussion cap rifle that fired only 2 or 3 times a minute. All of a sudden, when you started cutting in the breech block and allowing these to fire more than 10 times in a minute, They would get really hot and deal with the breech jamming or rounds jamming in the gun, and they would get too hot to even hold. So they weren't in active service for too long. It was in 1873 when the newer Martini Henry rifle was introduced, which was, I believe, a lever action. And the material was such that you could deal with the heat. Does anyone have any questions about any of the rifles? No questions? Right, I have one for you then. Would you like to see me fire the rifle? I thought you'd say that. Very good. So just give me a second to get ready. I do have to give you the rifles can be quite loud. We're in the parade square, so there's a lot of walls surrounding us. So you might want to plug your ears. I'm going to put my earplugs in. Please be sure to stay behind the ropes at all times. And I do just throw the rounds on the ground when I fired them. Sometimes they can roll. Please don't pick them up, even if they come close. They look cool, they're tempting, but I have to keep them.
And they're hot.
Good. So normally a soldier would have a pouch like this on his belt that he would contain, so that way it's easy to just grab the rounds off of his belt. But since I'm an officer, I will have never held a rifle. I would have carried my sword, maybe a pistol into battle. So I have to put the pouch on the ground. I might not be quite as fast as my well-trained enlisted counterparts, but you'll get the idea. You can see, since I'm using a breech loading rifle, I can load it from the kneeling position. I would not have to be able to do that with the musket or the muzzle loading. All right, here we go. To give me rounds that don't work. We'll see if I can get that one in afterwards.
It's basically shotgun shells.
Unfortunately, this third one's not going to fit.
Maybe better not use it.
I better not. I would hate to have it go off in my hand.
You get the idea. Cool.
I'm using slime actually, just to describe the rounds that we use today. Normally you would get a third firing, but it wasn't cooperating with me. But for those of you who may know, this is actually a modern 12-gauge shotgun.
Told you.
It's been cut, just shortened so that it fits in the breech. It would have been very similar to what we would have used back in 1867. However, it wouldn't have been plastic, of course. It would have been brass. Very similar material at the back. So we do use a percussion cap in our cartridges. Very good. So, does anyone have any final questions for me? No? Yes, well, thank you very much for joining me today, folks. I hope this demonstration maybe compels you to join me in the military.
Been there, done that.
Well, have a good day.
Been there, done it? Been there, done that. Got a bunch of pictures. She's turned them into an artillery crew. She dropped the lanyard at the firing lanyard. You see that? He bent over, picked it up. That's the sunglasses. This is why we came. Okay. Not from me or you.
Yep. Not a big can. Not a drugs.
Like me. That's not what I'm saying.
But that's not good. Show you the manager.